All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Start menu and go to Documents. And we're going to go into our folder, which in my case is Sean Sarcona or Sarcona Sean. I'm going to go into the W14. I'm going to go into 2510 because I have it separated. And then I'm going to go and copy my 2014 folder. Does everyone remember the 2014 and everyone have it ready to go? Yes, excellent. You guys are on top of things. Let's go and right click and copy it. We never want to move it. We always want to copy it out of there. And then we're going to go back to Documents, go into the Maya folder, delete the 2014 that's in here, and then paste ours in there. Your screens might flash in a second. All right. I'm going to try to load up that program again. It's taking forever, so we'll just let it go. All right, so now we can open up Maya. So if you remember on your desktop, there's a Maya 2014 folder, or not folder, but application. You could just run it from there. You can close that D folder if you want to close that D folder. It doesn't matter. You'll see throughout every single assignment we do how tricky it can be just to stay organized, because we get into these old habits of, like, if you're working in Photoshop, you just go to the file, you double click the file, it opens up in Photoshop, and you just start working. When you're done, you save it and you copy that one file out. In Maya, it works something like that, but not exactly like that, so we have to kind of figure out how Maya thinks and work into those specifications. Okay? All right, as you're booting up, you should see in this top menu, the shelf area right here, that we have our shelf icons. So it says History, Center Pivot, Outliner, AE, Hypershade, and Graph Editor. Everyone has those? That has their Maya up so far? Yes, good. Okay. Now, if someone's rendering on the computer, rendering is the process where they take all the work they've done inside Maya and they tell the computer to calculate what it's supposed to look like outside of Maya. Sometimes that can take hours, sometimes it can take days, sometimes it can take weeks. So if someone's doing that on your computer, there will be a sign on there, most likely, that says rendering do not turn off. Okay. If it's not affecting your work, try not to turn the computer off. But also, that means you can't copy your preferences. So these things are good to have, and we want to use them as much as we can. But get used to also kind of finding where those menus are located at. Okay, and we're going to go through some of those today. Just trying to make this fit. There we go. There. Okay. You'll also notice that there's this other window that popped up. This other window that popped up is called the output window. If you close it, Maya will reopen it. Okay, so if you don't want to see this window, you just click the little minimize button, and it'll minimize it down here so that you never have to look at it again. All right, so we went through last time, and we just basically we set up our interface, and we went through just like a couple of these items here. I'm just going to do our little refresher real quick, just so we can see what we did last time. So up at the top, this is your menu bar. Boom. There we go. And now that everyone's connected, I'll just try this again. Go here, client, show these clients. So now you should have a little floating window that you can just scoot over to the side. Cool. All right, so up here at the top, we have this menu bar, just like we have normal menu bars in every other program. The big difference in Maya, remember, is that we can switch them. So we can go from the animation menu that has animation items to polygons, or to surfaces, or to dynamics, or whatever. Okay? So if you don't see that right away, if I tell you go to this menu and you can't find that menu, make sure you're in the right menu set. All right? Now, the easy way to do that, hover your mouse in the center of your screen, all right, not near the bottom, but near the center of your viewport, and hold the space bar down. Okay? if you hold the spacebar down, this is going to open up the Hotbox. Okay? Don't click the spacebar, just hold it down. And by holding it, this shows every single menu item inside of Maya. All right, so this is the Hotbox. It has every single menu item inside of Maya that we can get to. So if we wanted to go to animation, we can just see there's the animation menu set straight across that middle area. If we wanted to go to modeling, we could go right here to that polygon mesh modeling. If we wanted to go to lighting, we can go down here. Okay, so without having to swap through, oh, I broke it. There we go. Without having to swap through these menus here, you can use the Hotbox to get where you need to get and get what you need to get. Okay, I heavily recommend you use the Hotbox because it's such a time saver. At first, it's going to be tricky. At first, you're going to pop this thing open and you're going to stare at it like a deer in the headlights, trying to figure out where your stuff is you're trying to get to. Okay, but it becomes easier the more you do it. All right, so that's the Hotbox. These are the menu sets. This item here that we played with last time, that we added those menu keys to, those are the shelves. Okay, and right now we're on the custom shelf. That's the one that we set up. On the far left, we have our moving, scaling, rotating tools. We're going to play with those a lot today. On the bottom, we have our timeline. We have our script editor, our error stuff. On the right, we have display layers, and we have a channel box. Okay, that's the quick and dirty what our interface looks like. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an object. So we can go up to create at the top, if you see where create is, but we're going to use the Hotbox just to get used to using the Hotbox. So hold down the space bar, and then go over to create, and then go down to Polygon Primitives, and then go down to Sphere. And then you can just let go of the mouse, and then let go of the space bar. Okay, so we want to go to the Create, Polygon Primitives, Sphere. Okay, and all a sphere is, or a polygon sphere is exactly what you think it would be. It's a circle that's 3D, okay? But it's a polygon, and the only difference between a polygon and the other type of surface we're going to deal with is a NURBS, is that they, not the only difference, but the biggest difference is how the computer itself is kind of calculating them, and then what things we can do to them, all right? So that'll make more sense once we get into it. All right, so now we have a sphere in our perspective view, okay? This view we're looking at is our perspective view. It's kind of like having a real camera in the view where we're looking at a sphere, and we can move that camera around, okay? So there's 3 keys we need to know. Number 1, we need to know the Alt key, okay? And that's going to be held down for every single move we do here. And they're very easy. So Alt and left mouse button in the viewport allows us to do what's called orbiting, where we spin around this. So I hold Alt, I hold the left mouse button, and I can drag around this thing to spin around my object. Okay? I can also Alt, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag to get to a different side of this. Okay, is everyone's Alt and left mouse button working? No. Alt and left mouse button. Okay, so Alt left mouse button allows us to take and just spin our camera around. Okay, we don't see the camera, we're looking through the camera right now. All right, we're physically looking through a CG camera. All right, now Alt, and this is gonna be a little bit tricky, Alt and middle mouse button allows us to do what's called tracking or panning. Okay, basically allows us to just move the camera over or up or whatever. So Alt left mouse button is orbit to spin around the object. Alt middle mouse button is tracking or panning, allowing us to physically move where we're pointed. And then, big surprise, what's the last one? What was it? Right click. So Alt and right click is our zooming, okay, or our dolly thing. This allows us to zoom into the object and zoom out of the object. Okay, so Alt left mouse button, spin around. Alt middle mouse button, track or pan. Alt right mouse button, zoom or dolly. All right. So we can spin around and we can do all that kind of stuff. All right. Now some scenes that we have are going to be enormous. All right. Not in this class, but in some other bigger classes, we kind of go really far out. And this entire thing is kind of like a Sim City of things where we just have buildings and whatever else going on. There we go. Okay. We can go back to our default. Sometimes we get lost too. So it's like, hey, where'd we go? I don't know where we went. So we can get back to our default spot by using the left bracket. The left bracket is the one right below or next to the P. Okay. So left bracket is to go to your last view. And you can see how it's like undoing my camera's movements. Okay, so if I get too far out, I left bracket a couple times, and I can get right back to where I was. And then the right bracket, they were thinking when they made these shortcut keys, the right bracket takes you to the next view. Okay, so you have those two things on your hotkey menu. Go to last view, left bracket. Go to next view, right bracket. And the bracket is the square one. Okay, it's not the squiggly one. It's the square looking one. Like a square cut in half. Once you understand the interface of Maya, it just becomes a whole lot easier. Okay, and they've made, they actually put some thought into everything that they've done. So it's not just like they're like throwing out hotkeys willy-nilly in most cases. So the next one on our list is frame selected. So frame selected, guess what frame selected's hotkey would be? Someone say F? Okay, it's F. There we go. See? So to frame the selected object, we hit F. There's no big secret. And then to frame all, what would that hotkey be? What was it? It's A. Obviously, they can't do F again because they already did that. So they did A for all. Now, we're not going to see a difference if we frame selected or we frame all, because obviously we only have one object in the scene. Okay? But these hotkeys that we have in navigation, you're going to use them every single day. And you're going to use them 1,000 times throughout the day. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so we'll go through the navigation again just to make sure everyone has it. Orbit view, Alt and left mouse button. Track view, Alt and middle mouse button. Dolly, Alt and right mouse button. Go to last view, left bracket. Go to next view, right bracket. Frame selected is F, and frame all is A. It's like Fonzie would say. Most of you probably don't even know Fonzie. Okay, so now let's go down the list. Wireframe. Right now we're in wireframe mode. We can see through the object. If you've been in Illustrator and you've done the gradient mesh assignment and you've seen wires in there when you click Option or whatever and you click the button, that's what we're looking at, is just the wires or the lines that go into making this object. Okay, so that's called wireframe. And the shortcut key for it is number 4. Okay, we just hit 4 on the keyboard and that's wireframe. Okay. Now, I told you they did some thinking here. So the next one on the list is shaded. So what would the hotkey be for shaded? 5. There we go. And then the hotkey for textured is 6. See? They make it easy. And the hotkey for lights, 7. And then the hotkey for paint effects is 8, but don't hit 8. Okay, I'll show you what happens when we hit 8, because eventually someone's going to do it, is that everything goes away and we have this white screen and we're no longer in Maya, we're just doing like this Photoshop painting thing. All right. Before Maya was on PCs, it was on a platform called Linux or IRIX. And IRIX is more of a Linux-based or Unix-based operating system. And at the time, they didn't have Photoshop. So what they would do is they would go into a program like this to do any work that they would need to do for painting stuff, for painting textures, painting backgrounds, whatever it was. If you get in this mode, all we have to do is hit 8 again, and we're out of it. Okay? All right, so 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right, so now let's delete this sphere, because we need to move on to a different object so that we can see this a little bit clearer. So click the sphere, if your sphere is turning blue, you need to right-click and hold and go to object mode. Okay, so right-click on your sphere, go to object mode, and then click it, and then hit delete. On the top right is object mode. Okay, so now we're going to create, under NURBS primitives, we're going to create a sphere. Okay, so create NURBS primitive sphere. All right, now we have a sphere. You'll notice that this sphere has a lot less divisions than the polygon sphere did. Okay, a polygon is basically a what you see is what you get. A NURBS item, we can control it based on the points of it. So if you think of a Bezier curve, like the pen tool, you have a point, and you can control how that arch happens in there. A polygon doesn't work like that. A polygon says, you have a point, I'm just going to connect those two lines. Okay? So for a polygon object, we need a lot more divisions. Let me show it up here. Okay, now we will break the rules on that. If we want a polygon sphere to be super smooth, we just have to add a lot more divisions. A NURBS sphere, we don't need to add 1,000,000 divisions because it already has kind of this built-in function to keep it going smooth. Okay? All right, so now if your sphere isn't shaded, shade it. I'm not even going to tell you the hotkey. Okay, so now we have a shaded sphere. So now the next items on our list is rough model, medium model, and smooth model. So rough model is number 1. Okay, and you can really see if you spin your camera around a little bit of what this rough model is looking like. All right, it's looking more like that polygon description that I gave you. Okay, so it's going from point to point to point without any interpolation, without any transition, trying to keep it smooth. Okay, now the reason for this is sometimes you'll get a model that will literally take your computer and bring it down to its knees. Okay, like a car would be just like a crippling thing on a computer because there's so much detail and there's so many different pieces in there. So in order for it to actually be workable, they allow this kind of rough model mode where everything is just kind of like dumbed down. Okay, so they have this that allows us to do that. Okay, so now if we hit 2, that'll be our medium resolution. And then any guesses on smooth? 3. Okay, so this is rough, medium, and smooth models. Okay, now we do this, like I said, because we want to be able to kind of control how we're interacting inside the scene. If for some reason, if you did the Illustrator assignment, you know that in order for you to work correctly and get that final one done, you had about 1,000,000 layers in there. In order to work, you had to hide everything else except for the 2 layers you're working on, right? Same thing goes here. Okay, you have to kind of manage your resources, is what we call it, inside here so that we don't kind of overload the computers and it takes us a lot longer to do things. All right, so as we're working, we might switch between these. But don't think that just because you have this, that that's going to be the end product. All right, be aware that we have that 3 mode and whatever else. All right, so now let's delete our NURBS sphere by just hitting the delete button. Okay, now let's go up to create again. And we're going to go to polygons this time and go to Polygon Cube. So create, Polygon primitives, cube, voila. Okay, so now we have a Polygon Cube. Before we were working in, just tap the space bar again. There you go. Before we were working in NURBS, now we're in polygons. Okay, so we're getting exactly what I said before, is that they're just kind of connecting these points. So this point here is connected to that point, is connected to that point, and so on. So if we hit 2, what we're going to see, make sure it's selected, then hit 2. What we're going to see here is what's called smooth preview. So it's giving us the square or the cube around it is the original shape. The sphere in the middle is the preview of what it would look like if it was smooth. Okay, and then if we just hit 3, we get rid of that cage and we just see that sphere. All right? So polygons can become very smooth without having a lot of divisions. But what's going to happen with this, I'm going to click this render button just so you can see, is that once it renders, you see that my perfect sphere is now a cube. On your screens, it looks a lot better. So we have to just be aware of certain things. If there's certain kind of nuances to Maya that you're not going to see anywhere else, especially if you've never touched a 3D program before. Okay? So that 1, 2, 3, we'll just keep that in our minds to say, okay, his isn't looking the way mine's looking. Do I have 1, 2, and 3 hit, or am I on a different mode or a different object or whatever? Okay? We have to be aware of these things. All right. So that is that. Standard or full screen. Control spacebar. Okay, Control spacebar takes us to a full screen mode. If you are a professional in the industry and you want to work at your most efficient, you want to get rid of all the junk. Okay, the shelf really is junk. A lot of the industry people don't use it because they use other methods to do what they need to do. The channel box over here, you don't really need to use it. This bottom stuff you don't need to use unless you're animating. So a lot of people, once they get out there, they'll start using this, where they're just working here and then using the Hotbox as theirs. Or, I don't have it on this one, Shift-C, there it is. Or some of these menu items we can actually bring up with a shortcut key on the keyboard. So right now I'm holding Shift-C right-click. That's not a hotkey you need to know. But Shift-C and right-click brings up this menu that allows me to get to some of those specific things. And this type of thing, I could make my own. If I know that I'm using X, Y, and Z tools, I can have a menu that is just those tools. Or if I see that I'm using the paintbrush all the time and the fill bucket and the blur tool, I can add those all the time, or add these to a list and just jump to them from there. Okay. So again, don't be freaked out if you get to your computer, it's like that. Just hit Control spacebar and everything comes back. Okay. Change background color. Right now our background color is this gradation. It's just this dark blue, on here looks black, to a lighter blue. So if you hold down Alt and hit B for background, you can cycle between the different backgrounds. Okay? And again, the reason we do this kind of stuff is some things are going to look better. It's going to be easier for us to read and see what's going on just on a different background. Okay? Especially if we don't have something selected. And we hit this thing from the wrong angle, you can see how my cube really blends in with the background. It's not terribly bad, but it blends in pretty good. So that's why I want to change the background color to make it a bit more visible, so a bit more readable in the view. Okay. So now the next one, jumping in and out of views. Up until now, we've been working fully in our perspective view. Okay. Perspective means that we have in the computer an emulated real-world camera. Okay, so it's kind of just like your phone cam or your webcam or whatever it is, where it has some perspective to it, it has some depth to it. If I zoom in on this thing, you can see how we get this kind of these lines that are dropping off into a vanishing point somewhere. Okay, so we're going to switch to what are called orthographic views. Orthographic views have no perspective to them, and they're dead on front, dead on side, dead on top view. Okay, so we just tap the space bar. Oops. Let me switch mine back because this was in here. For view, there we go. We tap the space bar, and this takes us to our 4 different views. Okay. Now we have up top, here's our perspective view. We have our top view, we have the front view, and we have the side view. Now the reason we would have these is, let's say we're modeling a car, we need to make sure that the hood of the car, the roof of the car, everything in that car goes perfectly aligned with the way it should be. Perspective isn't going to give us that, okay? Because there's some sort of drop off here, we're never going to be able to align anything in perspective view. But we can definitely look at the side view or look at the front view and do this kind of stuff. Yes, ma'am?
I don't get that one.
Okay, so if we move over the top view with our mouse, we don't have to click anything. We just move our mouse over it and tap the space bar. It'll take us into the top view. Okay, these are also helpful if you're modeling like a person's face, or you're modeling something very specific where you have to make sure that these lines are flowing the correct way, all right? Because we're dealing with 3D, we're not looking at simply like a 3/4 shot and trying to re-emulate that 3/4 shot. We literally have to go through and build our objects. So we need to know, what does it look like from the side view? What does it look like from the front? What does it look like from the top? Okay, let me show this little quick thing. So here's a typical setup that people would have for doing like a car modeling. So they would bring in pictures of what does the car look like from the front, what does it look like from the back, what does it look like from the side, and then they can use this as reference. Here's another good example. Here's an airplane. In this case, they're using these images to reconstruct this airplane. And again, this isn't a flat image, so we can't just simply draw over it with some pens and then color it in, because we want to be able to spin it around. So when we do stuff like create these tires, we're not simply creating this like half crescent shape, we're actually building a tire. We're building what the foundation of that tire looks like. When we build these, I don't see a propeller on this yet. When we build the propeller, we want to understand, what does the propeller look like and what are the components of it that we need to have. And we build these things, okay? Back to Maya. All right, so move your mouse over perspective view, tap the space bar, and get back into perspective view. Okay, now there's another way that we can get to those views, and this is the better way to do it, is, again, we hold down the space bar to get to the hotbox, okay? Your hotbox has so many different hotkeys, this is usually the spot to go. And then if you hold down your mouse in the Maya area in the middle, it'll pop up all of your different views. Okay? So if I want to get to the front view, I can just go to front view and then let go. And now I'm in the front view. I can hold the space bar, go to the right view. Hold the space bar, go to perspective view. Okay? Typically, you don't need to see the front and the left and the top and perspective all at the same time. Okay? So I typically recommend we go that route and hold the space bar, click on that Maya, and then find our stuff here. Okay? Now, just like we were popping this open, I can customize each one of these windows. I can make this one the right side, this one the bottom view, this one the left view, or whatever. This one in perspective. That we have two perspective views. And sometimes you want that. Okay? Everything is customizable inside of Maya. All right. Next one, menus. So to get to these menus up here, like we talked about, it's preferred go through the hotbox. If you're not comfortable going to the hotbox and you're just like, the teacher's crazy, I just want to go to the menus and make it easier, okay? There are hotkeys even for that. So if we go not F1, because F1 is always help in every single program, but if we start at F2, that's going to be animation menu. F3 is going to be polygons. And you can assume F4 is surfaces, F5 is dynamics, F6 is rendering, and that's as far as we're going with that one. Okay, so F2, F3, F4, F5, and F6 are those menu items. Now you should get in the habit. One of the reasons I don't like to use those menu items is because it takes my hand away from that bottom left corner of the keyboard. When you're working in Maya, let's leave that one there. When you're working in Maya, I'm a right-handed person, okay? So I keep my hand down here. Every program that I use, I keep my hand down here. And I try to avoid moving it away from this spot. So as you're working in Maya, you're not going to be sitting there with the mouse just kind of moving things around. You have to have it here because all your major hotkeys are in this area, okay? So when I go, have to click F2, 3, or 4, I have to extend my hand. So get in the habit of keeping your hand on these buttons down on the bottom because it'll just go a lot quicker, okay? Avoid using, obviously, like one of the hotkeys we'll get into is Control-G. Don't use this Control-G, just use that one, and just get in the habit of stretching your fingers and getting them into the right spots. All right, so that was the menus. Then the hotbox, what is the hotbox hotkey? Spacebar, but it's hold the spacebar, right? Because the other one above it under viewports is tap spacebar. All right, we're good so far? Excellent. New scene. Same key, hotkey in every program. What's new file, new scene? Control N. And then open scene, Control O. Save scene, Control S. Excellent. So those should be pretty much freebies because they're used so universally. There it is. All right, so now we get to actually move something around. In Maya, there's a lot of time spent selecting things, okay? Because we're dealing with lots of objects, and each object has individual points on them or different components that we can select, there's a lot of time we can spend on selecting the right thing in order for this to work correctly, okay? So if we used our hotkeys here, the Q key is the select button, okay? Now every one of the menu items I'm going to show you is a select item, but this one doesn't have a manipulator, all right? So when I'm selecting stuff, there's nothing else hovering around the mouse that could get in the way, or hovering around the object that could get in the way. So pay attention to that. So Q is our select tool. Any guesses on the move tool? W. Excellent. Okay. So W is the move tool. So you'll see that when I click W and you click W, that we get these arrows that pop up. Okay. These arrows are specifying the direction that we can move this specific object. Okay. There's a red, green, and blue arrow, and then in the center is this little yellow box. All four of those things are things we can use to move this object around. Okay. The red, if I click and drag on that red arrow, it turns yellow, and then I can move it. So click and drag on your object and move it. And then click in a different direction and move it. And then click in a different direction and move it. Okay, you can also zoom out and spin around and move it somewhere else. Wonderful. Okay, so this is the move tool, and every tool is going to operate in a similar fashion. Okay, meaning that when I click on any one of those directions, it's going to turn yellow. Okay, and the reason it's turning yellow is because once I click on it, it's basically activating it. So now that I've clicked on this blue one, it turns yellow, it's activated. I no longer need to click on it in order to move it. Okay, so I can move my mouse way off to the side, use my middle mouse button, and I can still move it in that direction without having to get right on top of it. Okay, that becomes a helpful item further into the semester. All right, so Q was select, W was move. What is rotate? E. Most people say R, but for whatever reason they chose E. Okay, this one is a little bit different manipulator. This one is actually like a sphere encasing our object. And it has the same thing. It has a red line, a blue line, and a green line. So we can rotate in just the red direction, just the blue direction, or just the green direction. There's also a line that goes around it, this lighter blue one. We never ever want to touch that lighter blue one, okay? It just causes bad things to happen. So this lighter blue one that's on the outside, never touch it. Now, if you click on it, sorry. That's okay. Now, if I click on that blue circle going around it, you'll notice that it becomes yellow. So now it's no longer blue, okay? We still don't want to touch it, all right? So I just click off, and then I can click back on it, or I can click one of these other axes to get that to go away. Okay. Now the next one is scale. Scale is going to be R. I could just swap those, but they didn't do it. All right, and then again, we're dealing with red, green, and blue. And then we also have this box in the middle, okay? If we grab it in the red direction, it scales it just in that direction. If we scale it in the blue, scale it in the green, okay? Now, if we wanted to scale it proportionally, meaning that we don't lose any of our proportions, that's where we can grab that middle one. So scale is really the only one you want to use that middle box or use that extra item, okay? Yes, sir. Okay, so what case sensitive means is that if I hit Q is a different hotkey than hitting Shift Q. Okay, so that allows them to have that many more hotkeys that they can add to the list. So we have to be aware of that, because if we're trying to get to the scale tool and it's not going to the scale tool, well, there's a good chance that we have caps lock on. In Maya 2014, when you have caps lock on, you get this little pop-up message that says caps lock is on right in the middle of your screen, so you can see that the caps lock is on. Okay? You never, ever, ever, ever want to have the caps lock on. So we always turn it off. So just be aware of that too. Because the same thing goes for undo. Undo, which is further down the list, which we'll get to, is just Z. There's no Control Z. They're saving you a button. So it's just Z. Shift Z or capital Z is to redo. So you have to be aware of that. You keep hitting undo, 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 and it's saying no more commands to redo. Okay. So again, Q, W, E, R. And then the next one, which is show manipulator, is T. Okay. We're not going to see anything happen with this one right now, but I'm just going to show you an item that will benefit from using the show manipulator. Okay, so this is a light for the scene, and basically that's a spotlight, and I want to position it to aim kind of at, this thing here. So what I can do is I can hit T, and it brings up this thing called the show manipulator. And it allows me to have this extra control over the light to say, okay, the light's going to be starting here and pointing there. Okay, so I can very quickly kind of point the light where I want to and not have to worry about moving it and then rotating it, moving it and then rotating it. There are several tools that take advantage of the show manipulator, which we'll get to, but just know the shortcut key is T for that. Okay. Now all of these menu items are also on the left over here, on the left of our window, but they're not in order. Since they've created the QWERTY hotkey thing, they've added other ones in here. One of them is the lasso tool. Another one is a paint selection tool, and then I think that's it. Okay. Now the next one I think I put on there. Show manipulator. Yes. Last tool used is Y. Okay. And what that means is, let's say we're in Photoshop and we use the paintbrush tool, and then we go out of the paintbrush tool and we're in the select tool. We want to toggle back and forth between the select tool and the paintbrush tool. We can just hit the letter Y and it'll take us into that tool. We can do what we need to and then get out of the tool. Okay? So it's whatever the last tool used was, that's where we can go to get that. All right, you're going to find there's 5 million. I'll show you the list. You can remember this if you get bored on break. Here are all the different hotkeys that is in the list that you can add to and create and modify and whatever else. So these are all different hotkeys and different things you can add and whatever else. List all. There we go. And then that's with no modifier. And here's the ones with the control modifier. Here's the one with Alt. Here's the list all there. It's crazy. Lots of different things. Okay. Last tool used. All right. Go into, you have your object selected. You have your move tool on. Sometimes our move tool is too small. Sometimes it's too big. So just as a guess, what do you think to make something smaller hotkey might be? Minus. Bam. Nailed it. Okay. And then to make it bigger, plus. Oops, not delete. Okay. So we can make our manipulator really, really big using plus, make it smaller using minus. Okay. And this will come in handy because more than likely at some point during the semester, you're accidentally going to do this and then try to zoom in and manipulate this thing, and you're not going to be able to move it the exact direction you want to move it. Then you have to make it bigger. Okay. Obviously not that big. Complete tool. Complete tool is just enter. Okay. So when we're done with the tool, we want to get out of it. We can just hit enter and it gets us out of the tool. And then the next one, which is move pivot. If you had After Effects class, maybe in Illustrator or InDesign, you even experienced it a little bit. But you had what's called a pivot. You had where the object is basically pivoting around, moving around, whatever. if I have this sphere, I'm just going to delete my cube and make a sphere. If I have this sphere, and I want the sphere to kind of swing in an arch, okay, it's very difficult to kind of animate this moving like that. It's much easier for me to go through and rotate the sphere from above it. If I go into my rotate tool and I rotate it now, it's just doing that. That's not what I want. So I can either hold down the D key, or I can hit the insert key, and then I can move this pivot, okay? And then by moving it, now I can have it rotate from that point, okay? This is another big thing that we'll be going through, because sometimes it just makes things easier to have the pivot in a spot where that makes sense, all right? That makes sense for the specific assignment. I'll give you a really good example besides that one. That was an excellent one, even though you weren't cheering. Here's a cube. I'm going to use a couple snapping tools, and I'm going to just move this cube over here to the side. Right there, perfect. Okay, and I'm going to make it bigger. And there it is, perfect, perfect, and more perfect. Okay, so now I have this. So now I want to duplicate this thing, and I want to scoot it over and make another one. So I can duplicate it, and I scoot it over, and all I have to do is just scale it down. Okay. Now here it is without me using the pivot in the correct spot. I want to put that thing on the grid plane. Okay, well, let me just kind of eyeball that and eyeball the positioning here and scale it up, and then whoops, okay, now I got to move it up again because I scaled it. Okay, so this process could take me forever to do something like this. And then when I duplicate and I scoot it over and then I scale it down, I not only have to move it downward, but now I also have to move it back, and I also have to move it over. Okay, so by me putting the pivot for this object in that bottom corner here, as I duplicate this, all I have to do is scale it, and it automatically moves it from that point. Okay, so for moving the pivot, we're either going to hold down the D key, or we're going to just hit insert to get in and to get out. Okay, and you'll see that's the manipulator for it. You can see I'm in the scale tool. I see those green boxes and the blue and the red. If I hit D or hold D, I turn into just these lines. Okay, so if you're trying to move it and you're like, hey, this thing isn't moving, it's because you're in pivot mode. Attribute editor, Control A. Okay, don't go up to the menu. You can use your shelf here if you want that says AE, but just hit Control A. Yes, sir. Okay, so attribute editor. Now this guy that we've popped up here, this is basically it's a list of everything that we're doing. If you want to come in and work, you can. Yeah, those two are open. This is a list of everything that is about that object. Maya keeps what's called a history of the objects. So everything that's happened to it, everything that's going to happen to it, what it looks like when it renders, what animation we have connected to it, it keeps track of all this stuff. Okay. So in here, if I go to these tabs, you'll see if you hit Control A and you go to the far left tab, you'll get a list of all the different things. And on that specific object, it has listed its translates. And in my case, it's this. And here's its scales and its rotates and whatever else. If I go under pivot, it has where the pivot is. It has stuff like display. It has drawing overrides. Where do those drawing overrides go? So I can actually like enable an override and say I want to template this thing. Okay, so now I can't even like see it. It's just like invisible. Or I can say drawing overrides. I want to color this pink, and somehow it would show me pink. If I deselected, there we go. Okay, so we can do stuff like that kind of help us with our workflow. You're going to spend lots of time in the attribute editor. These tabs are going to get crazy. We're going to have some items, their tabs are going to be like 50 items wide because we have so much stuff going on in these objects, okay? So we'll manage that. But just that's where we're going to be going. And use Control A. Get used to Control A, pop it open, and then close it. Control A, pop it open. Setting keyframes. All right. To set a keyframe, we're going to use the S key. S as in set key. Okay? So we'll just skip that. We don't need to go any further. Okay, undo, like I said before, is Z. Just plain old Z. And then redo is Shift Z. Okay, so save yourself the time of using Control Z. It'll still work, but just use Z and Shift Z. Okay. Repeat action. That's G. Another cool one that I wish other programs had. Here is a cube. And pay no attention to what I'm doing here. Okay. So I did an extrusion on this so that I can kind of pull this out. So what I want to do is do another extrusion. I could go back into the menu and go here and go up to extrude and pull it out again, but I don't want to have to do those clicks. So what I can do is I can hit G, and G will redo that command, which means that I have another extrusion already waiting here. I can hit G again and pull it out. Hit G again, pull it out. Hit G again, hit G again. Okay, so you can see how I can build this shape very quickly just by using that G repeating tool. Okay, the repeat action, sorry, not tool, repeat action and complete and last tool used are going to be used a whole lot. Duplicate. Duplicate is Control D. And I believe in several programs it's Control D. Okay, so I want you to go make sure you have your object selected. Let me delete some of my objects so we can get back to where we were. All right, so you're going to take your object, you're going to hit Control D. You're going to move it in one direction. So grab one of the arrows and move it past it. Okay, it's like I just moved mine above it. You can move yours wherever, I don't care. Okay, then you're going to hold down Shift and tap D. Okay, Shift and D. I don't even think I have it on there. This is a bonus one, so you can just, that's extra. Is duplicate with offset or duplicate with transform. It doesn't always work. That's the only crappy thing about it. Okay. Basically, it figures out how far you move the original object, and then it does it again. Okay. So for this kind of thing, it's like, okay, big deal. That's kind of stupid. But what we can do is, again, I'm going to move my pivot. And this is, too many houses don't even have this kind of stuff because it's too difficult in the real world. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to scoot it up. There we go. And then I'm going to Shift D this thing. Look at that, spiral staircase. Okay. Now imagine trying to position all of these in the exact spot that they should be in. You would drive yourself crazy. This is a mixture of using the pivot in the right spot and using that duplicate with transform. Okay. Boom. Group. Control G is to group. Okay. Grouping works completely different in Maya than it does in everything else. Okay. If you group something in Photoshop, InDesign, I don't know if Photoshop has that. There's no grouping. It's like grouping layers. But if you group something in InDesign or Illustrator, it's grouped and it's stuck together, and you have to use other tools to get it out of that group. Right? Okay. So what I mean by that is, let's say I wanted to move my spiral staircase. Not a big deal. I can grab it and I can scoot it over, and everything moves along merrily. Okay. But if I want to scale this, and I go through and scale it, you can see that these things are not scaling the way I want them to scale. They're kind of just scaling individually. So I say, okay, I see what's going on here. I need to group all this stuff so that they all group as, or they all move as one or scale as one. So I'm just going to hit Control G to group it. They're grouped. You can see the color. See how they're all green? That means I have the group selected. I have all those items selected. And then I can scale it, and everything works the exact way that it should work. Okay. But then what happens is I go out for a break, talk to my buddy. I come back, and this is deselected. So I say, oops, I need to scale it up again because I didn't scale it up enough. So I click on it, and you see how I grab just that one piece. Okay. In a group, we can grab the individual pieces, or we can grab the whole group. All right. This is where the outliner comes in handy. If you click in your shelf, you have the Out L, which is outliner. Click on that guy. And what it's going to do is it's going to show you a list of all the objects in your scene. Okay. The one that I have selected right now is Group 1. If I click this little plus sign, I can see all the little pieces that make up Group 1. And I can see Group 45 or P Cube 45 is the one I have selected. All right. So if I want to grab the group, I need to grab group 1. And now it's all green again. And now I can scale it and everything works. Okay. So just be aware of that. It might be a little bit tricky at first, but just be aware of how grouping is going to work compared to other programs that are out there. The next one is parenting. Parenting is P. Unparenting is Shift P. Okay, so I ungroup them, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all of these except for the bottom one. There we go. And then I'm going to shift click the bottom one last, and then hit P to parent it. Okay, so now what happened, instead of it making a new group, it takes all those objects and just parents them to that last one I had selected. So this one here, P cube 2, is that bottom one. So now as I scale, it still works. It's still all connected. But there's no actual, in the formal sense, a group. Okay, it's all just kind of connected to polycube 2s or P cube 2s. I can still grab each one of these things and do individual stuff to it. Okay, I can grab this and scale it all, together. But I lose the ability to maintain anything individual with that one because of how it's connected and parented. All right. So that again is going to be just something that's confusing. We'll get through it. Okay. All right. We're going to take a short break. Okay. So far, everyone has very good efforts, very good tries at these. I'm going to show you up here how I would create a Lego. One thing you're going to find, just like every other program, is there's never one way to do something. Even when I give you lectures and you're going through them and following it, sometimes I have to look back at the lecture myself to see what was I thinking at this point to get me to where you are at. Okay? And sometimes I do things completely different. Sometimes I have no idea why I did something. So a lot of you started off with a Polygon Cube, which is good. Real quick, one of the differences between Polygon Cubes and a NURBS Cube, they look exactly the same. But if I click on the NURBS Cube afterwards, you can see how I can grab the individual pieces of it and not grab the entire thing. Where the Polygon one, I can do that. Okay? Because the NURBS are like that rounding Bezier curve, it has some limitations. One of those limitations is that it can't be one piece all the time. Okay? So a lot of times NURBS are broken up into several pieces. Okay, so everyone had this right, kind of moving it into position. There we go. Like I said, you want to look around this thing because from this angle it looks one way, but from that angle it's going to look completely different. Okay, so I'm going to create a Polygon Cylinder, and I'm going to scale it down. Now this is where some people got tripped up on, is because as we're scaling this, we want to keep it proportionate. We want to keep that circle shape going. We don't want it to become squishy like that. Okay? So we have to be very careful. There's a couple ways we can do it. One way, we click and drag on the middle one. It scales it proportionately. Then we can move it up. And then if we needed it longer, then we could just go into the scale tool and just scale this one direction up. Okay? So scaling the whole thing down like this, and then scaling that one direction up is typically the way people like to do it. All right, so now I'm going to take this and just shove it off to where it is. A lot of times what makes things a lot easier is not doing any rotation. If we look at this Lego here, it's on this like 45-degree angle. And if we look at some of these other Legos, like, even like these guys here, how they're just like positioned different than just kind of like there. So we use this axis, we use this origin where the two black lines intersect as our modeling grounds. It makes everything a lot easier because our pivots are there and everything just makes it tons easier. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just take this and duplicate it and scoot it over here. And then what I can do is if I look at this one, I see that this one's translated Z. We didn't get too much into the channel box, but this one's translated Z as 0.389. So that means that this one, if it's on the opposite side of that black line, should just be negative. So if I go to negative 0.389, now it's in the exact same spot on the opposite side. Then I can take both of these, duplicate it, scoot it down, and then hold down Shift, and there we go. Okay. Now this is a very, very basic type of Lego. All right. If you're doing something where you just have a couple Legos, that's not a big deal to the computer. It can handle that no problem. If you're doing something like that, it becomes much more complex. Okay. And a lot of these, it's like crazy how much detail goes into doing something like that. But a lot of these we have to, again, think of optimal workflows as we're doing this kind of stuff. Sometimes we're not going to see the underside of a Lego. We're not going to see the holes. We're not going to see that opening and how things are going to connect. So it doesn't matter if we create a Lego with all that stuff. We could spend 3 hours building that bottom piece only to never see it. I had one student who spent 6 hours building these Lincoln logs and getting the little latches to look perfectly to the point where they could connect to each other. And then in his final scene, they were so far off you couldn't even tell they were Lincoln logs. All right. So we have to understand certain aspects of what the end result is going to be as we're doing this kind of stuff. All right. Now, just to give you just a better idea of how some of this stuff goes, I'm just going to duplicate this whole thing and shove it off to the side. And then I'm going to create a better one so you can see what a better one would look like. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to add a little bevel. I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to go to the bottom. And take this and I'm going to add a little bevel to that. That's good. I'm just going to duplicate it. There we go. So that looks like a pretty good Lego right there. Now I could go into even further detail and start modeling stuff on the underside, which would make it look more like a Lego. Okay? But again, it's all matters on what is going to be seen. If you've ever seen a video game, you may not even notice this, but when you see a character like 5 miles off in the distance and they're like running around doing whatever, and you're like, wow, that guy is so tiny. You know what? They spend so much time worrying about those kinds of little details that really add to the gameplay. Well, that guy is what's called a very low-res model, okay? Meaning that he is more like this, where he's just very blocky, and even all these divisions going around here would be a lot less. They would be like, a quarter of what they are there. And then as he got closer, then he's going to start to do what's called up-resing, where we have this higher resolution version, okay? And if we were to get to a certain spot where we needed to see the underside, then we would have another one. So when you see a video game nowadays, it's not simply just, here's the model, let's drop it in here. They have what's called level of detail, where the closer we are to the object, the more high-res the object is. The further away they are, the less detail that's in there, okay? Kind of like a thumbnail on a web page, very, very tiny, low-res image. You click on it, and then you see the big version, all right? So that's our Lego that we have. And you can see one looks a lot nicer. The other one looks, just kind of like whatever. A lot of the stuff that I was doing here, you saw me right-click and get this menu up. These are the components that we can play with. So right-click on your object and hold it on your object, all right? And you're going to see this menu pop up. Now, if you had a NURBS surface, you're going to get one menu set. If you have a Polygon surface, you're going to get another menu set, okay? And these are basically the components of things. In Illustrator and InDesign and Photoshop, if you create a path and you want to edit the points on the path, you have to go to a special tool that allows you to grab those points. Same thing here. If I wanted to grab a piece of this, let's just delete our stuff. I know you worked very, very hard on it, but just delete it. And then create a random object. I don't care what it is. I want to make a helix. That's my favorite one. Okay, if you right-click on this object and you hold the mouse button down, it brings up a list of items. The top area up here on mine says edge, vertex, vertex face, face, multi-UV, or multi, UV, and then object mode. Okay? Object mode is what we're currently in. It allows us to grab the entire object and move that entire object around. If we right click and go to edge, okay, you'll see that your object turns blue. Object mode is green. We can grab the whole object. Component mode is always blue. Okay? So now what we can do is we can grab the edges. So if I wanted to, I can grab one of these edges and I can move that edge. So click on one of your edges and just move the edge. Wonderful. Okay? So we can adjust things. So if we're modeling a car, we're modeling a person, we're modeling anything, we need to be able to grab edges or faces or whatever. All right? So we can grab multiple ones, and we could also scale them. Or we can grab multiple ones and we can rotate them, or we can move them, or do whatever. All right? We can right click again, hold it down, and go to vertex. Okay? And vertex is going to be the little points that are connecting all these edges together. So if you look close to your surface, you'll see all these little purpley points. We can click those little purpley points, and we can move those individual points around. Same thing here. Same thing there. Okay. We can also right click and go to not vertex face. This does something cool. You can do it real quick just to see. But it like explodes it. So you can actually see like where all the individual faces are. We never really use this one. It's just kind of like, you know, if you want to see an exploded view of it, that's what it looks like. Right click and go to face. And then now we can grab the faces of this shape. A lot of the tools under the Edit Mesh menu deal with doing stuff to the faces. Okay, so we're going to get more into what these mean and what they do. It's very important. Oh man, it's going to be kind of stuck there now, isn't it? It's very important that we have an understanding of what these tools do. Hide modeling toolkit. Show modeling toolkit. All right, hold on. It knows that when I go to face and go to edge, I select the face, I select the edge. It knows that's what a wedge face is supposed to do. If I go here and I duplicate this over here, and we flip it around, I can combine these two objects into one, okay? And which is different than grouping. These are actually like combined, they're stuck together. And then I can go here and grab this face and that face, and I can go to bridge. And that creates a bridge between them that I could then play with and say, okay, I want this to twist. Or I want it to taper and not twist. There we go. Okay, so I can play with these settings and get different results based on these. So this is where the mastery of the program comes in. It's not just understanding how to navigate in it, but also what do these tools do and what do I need them to do. A lot of these, like the ones, and they're kind of sectioned off, the ones in this area allow us to add divisions to a surface, okay? But it's how they're adding divisions to the surface is what each one of these is going to do differently. So sometimes you use one, sometimes you use another one, sometimes you use a combination of them. Okay, so we went through these: edge, vertex, face. UV and multi you don't typically use a whole lot. I had to use it for this for whatever reason. But once we're in this and we want to get back to object mode, that's where we right click and go to object mode. Okay. Now that menu that we're getting, that little pop-up, it's called a marking menu. And if we have several objects in our scene, I'll just duplicate whatever this thing is. Okay, and I want to get the faces on this one, and I right click and I go to face. What happens is this one highlights, okay? Because when I right clicked, Maya knew that I was over the top of this one, so it must mean that I want to see the faces on that one, okay? So if I undo that for a second, if I right click out nowhere's land and I go to faces, then it says, okay, you didn't have anything selected, or you had that item selected, you didn't right click on anything, so now you want to go to this specific item, okay? Then I can right click and go to object mode, and now I'm back to object mode. Pay attention to the colors of this. this is green object mode. That is different than when we go to any one of these, and it turns this lighter blue color. Okay? So just be mindful of those kinds of things. We could also switch to what's called component mode. We're kind of in like a temporary component mode when we right click. If we use F8, not F and 8, but the F8 function 8 key on the top of the keyboard, that brings us into component mode. That's the next hotkey on your list, I believe. Yes. So under miscellaneous, yes. That will take you into object mode, component mode, and then F8 again will take you out of it. Okay, so it's just a toggle. F8 goes in, F8 goes out of there. All right, now when I hit F8, you'll notice that it jumps right to points. Okay, it jumps right to vertices. What if I want to select faces? What if I want to select edges? Well, if you look at the top of the screen, right about here, as I hit F8, you'll see that those items change. Okay, those items up there, it's called a selection mask. And it allows us to pick what it is we want to select. So if I hit F8, I can go up here and say, okay, well, I don't want to select vertices, so I can turn that off, and they go away. But I do want to select faces. So I click on there, and now I can grab faces. Oh, wait, I don't want to select faces. I want to grab edges. And now I can grab edges. Or I can turn multiple ones on and grab multiple ones. All right, won't let me grab that and that, whatever. Sometimes it will let you grab them, and sometimes it won't. It's just a finicky program sometimes. And then I hit F8, and I'm back to this. Okay. Now this is still a selection mask up here, but it's a object selection mask. So I could basically say that I don't want to be able to select surfaces. And if I turn this guy off, and I click off of this, I can't. Oops, where'd that come from? I can't select surfaces in here at all. I can only select other items. Okay. If I turn surfaces on, then I can select other stuff. Yes, sir.
Can you pull one slice out of that thing?
Out of this thing?
Yeah.
Like just pop it off?
Like, yeah, pull like this one huge.
Like that.
Like one of the pieces of pie, I guess, is the whole thing, is what I'm saying. Like that whole thing and that.
Yeah, I can take that off.
All the faces and then move it.
Yeah, well, I can just go to mesh extract. And now that's a separate piece.
Oh,
okay. Yes, ma'am.
I don't have that menu you're talking about that you use on mine.
When you right click?
No,
the F8. Sometimes if you look up here, there's this little like arrow and little notch. Sometimes those are collapsed. And so you just have to stretch them out. Is it there now? There it is. Yep. Okay. So just be aware too that as we're selecting things, that sometimes we have to be in the right mode, object or component, and sometimes we have to make sure that we're selected up here on the correct object or component that we want to select. All right. Most times in this class, we're going to leave the object one alone, not touch the object one. But as we hit F8 and we grab these ones, we will be playing around with those ones. Okay. Now there's a reason that you'd want to use one over the other. I'm not going to bore you with the details now. I'll bore you with them later. Hide selected. Control H, hide selected. There we go. And then show selected is Shift H. Okay. Now I have to make sure I select the object. So when I hit Control H, it hides the object and makes it invisible, or it makes it deselected. So I use the outliner and say, there's the object I want. Shift H, now it's back. Okay. You'll notice too that when I hit Control H, oops, not that one. It's a bad example. Bad example. Those are all bad examples. There we go. Display, show. Oh, oops. Let me do this again. Sphere. All right, if I hide one object and I'm showing the other object, let me move that aside, you'll see in my outliner the difference in color. This one is basically like I don't know, a little bit bolder than the one below it. It's a little bit tinted. So again, Maya's kind of indicating that this object is hidden because it's kind of like grayed out a little bit. All right. So just be aware that everything in Maya has a purpose for why it's a color or why it's dimmed or something else. So we just have to be aware of it. You don't have to freak out about it, but just, as you're making your notes, say, okay, outliner, dimmed object, hidden. That's all that means. Non-dimmed, non-hidden. Painting, grid, curve, snapping. Okay. We're going to do one more thing, and then I'm going to let you guys out early. We're going to go through the snapping tools. So delete your object if you have it there, and just create a Polygon Cube. Okay. Now remember, if you can't delete something, you might be in object mode or in component mode, because in component mode you can delete faces, and if you don't have any faces selected, it won't let you do that. So you right click, you go to the object mode, then you click on it again, and then you can delete. Okay. So you're making a cube, and what we want to do is we want to do what I did before with that snapping and the pivoting. Okay. Because this is something, again, it just makes things easier. And the more times you do it, the easier it's going to get, and the more likely you're going to use it. So we're going to hold down the D key, and we want to move this pivot to that bottom corner. I don't care which corner you move it to, just one of the bottom corners, okay? Now, right now, it's not going to snap. All D is doing, remember, is just moving the pivot. We have to hold down another key, which is V. So we hold down D and V. Again, pay attention to what Maya's doing. Without V here, it's a square. Once we hit V, you'll see how that icon in the middle turns to a circle. Okay? So that's indicating that a snap is on. So we hold down D and V, and then we just move it to one of these corners. And you'll see how it's snapping right to one of these corners. Okay? Now V is our point snapping. Once it's in the corner, you can just let go. So hold DV, move it to a corner, and then let go. Okay, so that moved the pivot to the bottom. Now we want to move this item here onto the grid. Okay, the grid is irrelevant. The grid is basically, if you're looking at a graph from like math class, you have the 0 and 0 line. Well, the grid is our 0, 0 point. Okay, but it's for the entire world. It's where all of the stuff kind of is zeroed out. Okay, and because we're working in 3D, it goes in several directions. So we want to snap now to the grid. So the grid snap, any guesses? X. So we're going to hold X, and we're just going to drag it again. Notice how it turns from a square to a circle. And we're going to drag it, and it just snaps to the grid. Okay? So we're just going to move it along the grid and scoot it over. Let me make my screen a little bit better. And just scoot it over till we get to the edge of the grid. Okay? So I'm on the edge of the grid. Okay? Now, just because we put it there doesn't mean that our pivot is locked there. We can always move the pivot again if we wanted to. Okay? All right, a couple of you caught on to it that if we have one of these buttons highlighted, that our snapping isn't as functional as we would like it to be. Okay? So if my red, green, or blue manipulator is yellow, then that means it's only going to snap in that one direction. So if I have this yellow one highlighted and I hold V and I move it, or sorry, X, hold X and move it, it's only snapping in that one direction. I can't move it over here. It's just snapping vertically. Okay? So not only can we constrain it or snap it to a grid or a point, but we can also snap it anywhere we want in as far as like one direction this way or one direction that way. Okay? So now that we've put it here, you'll see how easy it is. We can just scale it this way and scale it that way and scale it down and whatever. Okay? And then the next one is snapping to curve. Any guesses on snap to curve's hotkey?
C.
It's C, snap to curve. Okay. Now, what is a curve? A curve is an edge. There are also under the create menu, there are actually curves inside here. We're not going to do the snap to curve right now. We'll get into snap to curve. It's a little bit trickier to use. Okay, so for right now, we can focus on just using snap to point and snap to grid. If I go to a green manipulator and I grab this green manipulator and start pulling it, you'll see over here that my scale Y is moving. okay? Because I'm moving, or I'm scaling it in just the Y direction. If I grab the blue, that's going to be Z. It's going to move it just in that Z direction. Okay? Now the only exception to this is that sometimes when we're in the rotate tool, this tool can just get kind of finicky in how the math is working out for it. So if I rotate it in the red direction, you see red works perfectly fine. If I rotate it in the green, I start to get where all three of them are moving around. It has nothing to do with what I'm actually doing here. It has more to do with the fact that it just doesn't like having an odd number like this -10. It would rather be like -90 and then rotating it in the green, and you see that I don't get that issue. It's rotating it in the Z direction this time, but whatever. All right, so rotate's always going to be a funky one, but just keep an eye on that as you're working. Okay, but the move tool is going to work perfect. Yes, sir?
Can you snap to other objects?
Yes, you can. Okay, just like when we snapped to the point on here, okay, we were snapping to an object. So if I had another object, like let's say I just duplicated this, I could grab the V snap and just snap it to the end of that one. Okay, and then shrink it down like that. And then duplicate it again, snap it to the end of that, and then scale that up or whatever. All right, whatever. And then grid obviously wouldn't snap to another object. Curve is where we really get into snapping to other objects. A lot of times what happens is the snapping tools, you might think you're not really going to use them. You just kind of eyeball it. But they're such a tremendous help. If we're working way out here, let me just create an object way out here. Okay. And then I say, well, for this specific object, I need to have a cube also in the scene. So I go and I create a cube. Okay, well, the cube gets created way back at the origin, way back at that 0, 0 point. So I could either hit F to frame it, there it is, and then zoom way out, and then scoot it way over, and then scale it up, and then kind of position it, where I want to. Or I'm already here, I create my cube, and then I say I know where it is, I know my snapping tools, I can just hold down V and use middle mouse button to snap it wherever I want. Okay? So if I can't get my hands on the manipulator, I can use middle mouse button as a way to snap the object over to where it's at. All right? So that becomes very handy for stuff like this, where let's say I have a bunch of objects here. I can go to vertices. I can grab all these. And if I wanted to, I'm going to go to my snapping and snap all of these flat. Okay? That way this object now just has this like flattened top that for whatever reason I needed a flattened top on a sphere. Okay? So I can snap all those together and line them up perfectly. Or as I'm modeling something, let's say something just isn't meshing right. It's just not turning out perfectly. So this one ended up kind of here, and this one ended up kind of there. I need this to be a perfect square. So then I could say, okay, well, I'm going to snap. I'm going to snap it in this direction, hold down V, middle click on this one. And it snaps this point, just because I had the arrow clicked, in that one direction, lined up with that one. Same thing here. I can click on this point, hold down V. I can even just click on the arrow and drag it, but it's going to snap it to the closest one. That's not the one I want, so I just move my mouse down here. Move my mouse up here. Okay? So these are things that as we were playing this little video game called Maya, that we're going to be working on. And don't be afraid ever just to say, I don't understand this tool. I need to take about 15 minutes or 10 minutes just to kind of go through it and work on it. When we come in next time, we'll be working on an actual project. It'll take us like a day and a half to do, or a day and an hour to do. Okay? It's nothing big, but we're going to be doing a lot of the stuff we did today, plus we're going to be doing a lot of other stuff in here as well. All right? All right, cool. So we can delete this. There we go. We're going to close down Maya. And we're going to back up our preferences before we leave. So we're going to go to Documents. We're going to go to the Maya folder. And we're going to right-click on the 2014. Make sure if you have multiple 2014s there, like some people in other classes, they just copy it and do backups. Make sure you right-click and copy that 2014 folder. Then go into your folder, delete your old one, and then paste the new one in. Okay, that should be the habit every single time you come to class, that we're deleting the Maya set in stone preferences that we have inside the Maya folder, and then we're copying our preferences into that folder. When we leave for the day, we copy our preferences from that folder and put them back in there. Okay? We didn't change any preferences today, so it wouldn't have been a big deal if we didn't do that. But next time if we add any preferences, we want to make sure that stuff is backed up. Okay? So that is